Caleb Voss believed the nightmare was finished the instant Lila went limp. He stood frozen in the swirling snow, certain the biting cold would quietly erase the evidence his hands had left behind. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching closer from the shadows behind him. A chill unrelated to the weather raced down his spine. Whatever came next, he realized with sickening clarity, would be far worse than what he'd already done. If this tale has you hooked, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. I've got another gripping story dropping tomorrow. While you're here, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you tuning in from? I love spotting viewers from every corner of the globe. Alright, let's dive deeper. Lila Harper's blood was still warm on the pavement when Caleb decided the night had grown silent enough to walk away. He loomed over her broken form, rolling his swollen knuckles, savoring the deep throb that had settled into the joints. The empty highway unfurled in both directions like an endless black ribbon, no oncoming lights, no distant engines, nothing but snow drifting down and a hush so complete it convinced a man he could get away with murder. Should have walked away when she first threatened me, he muttered under his breath, words lost to the wind. Lila lay face down on the frozen blacktop, one arm bent awkwardly under her chest, the other flung out as if she'd been reaching desperately for help that never arrived. Strands of her dark hair spread like spilled ink across the road, already collecting a fine layer of white flakes. A dark stain spread from her temple where her head had slammed the asphalt, and the sub-zero air, faint steam curled upward from the wound. Caleb dropped to a crouch, two fingers pressing against the side of her throat. A faint, erratic pulse answered, barely there, hanging on by a thread. Close enough. He rose, scrubbing his palms down the front of his jeans to wipe away the sticky warmth. His breath exploded in sharp white clouds. The wind sliced straight through his leather jacket, but adrenaline kept the cold at bay, buzzing like electricity under his skin, feeding that twisted sense of justification. She had pushed him to this point. Months of her endless questions, her suspicious glances, her whispered threats to expose secrets she had no business knowing. I'm finished covering for you, Caleb. She'd stood in the doorway of her apartment, keys clenched in her fist, overnight bag at her feet, acting like she held any real leverage. Like those words wouldn't come with a price. He stole one more glance at her motionless body. Her favorite red flannel shirt hung in tatters at the shoulder, jeans dark and heavy with melted snow. One boot had flown off in the struggle, lying abandoned a few yards away like forgotten proof. The freezing night would handle the rest. He'd read about it years back after a bad hunting trip, 28 degrees, soaked clothes, unconscious victim, core temperature crashes fast. 90 minutes, give or take, before irreversible damage. Maybe less in this wind. Come morning, she'd simply be another sad local story, artist perishes after car breaks down in storm. Cops would sketch the obvious picture, vehicle trouble, foolish decision to walk for help, fatal exposure. No one digs too deep into bodies found frozen in Minnesota winters. They just shake their heads and move on. Caleb trudged back to his pickup, boots grinding snow with every step. At the driver's door he hesitated, casting a final look over his shoulder. Lila hadn't twitched. Fresh powder was already blanketing her, soft and relentless, the ground quietly reclaiming its own. He swung into the cab. The engine growled awake, hot air roared from the vents. His fingers shook, not from remorse, but from the sudden drop after the rush. He'd never struck anyone with that kind of force before, never felt bone yield under his fist, never seen a person collapse like a marionette with cut strings. It had been disturbingly easy. The headlights raked across her shape one last time as he shifted into gear. For a split second, the beams caught her face, eyes shut, lips slightly parted, snowflakes clinging to her lashes like tiny diamonds. Then he swung the wheel, and she vanished into the rearview darkness. He floored it. Red taillights flared briefly before the storm swallowed them whole. The highway bent into thick pine forest. Seconds later, the entire scene disappeared as if it had never happened. Gone. Finished. Clean. He let out a long, slow breath, heartbeat finally easing. His phone vibrated in the cup holder, probably his brother asking why he'd vanished. Caleb ignored it. He'd piece together an alibi later. Right now, all he needed was miles between himself and that stretch of road. The empty blacktop unrolled ahead, flanked by snow-laden evergreens. No cars, no houses, no signs of life, just wilderness and the smug certainty that he'd slipped away untouched. Caleb permitted himself the ghost of a smile. No one knew Lila was out here. No one was coming for her. He'd made damn sure of that. Caleb had never unleashed that kind of fury on another person before, never felt the sickening give of bone under his fist, never seen a body fold like a puppet with severed strings. The violence had flowed out of him far too easily, almost instinctive, and that ease unsettled him more than the act itself. The truck's headlights carved one last path across Lila's crumpled shape as he dropped the gear into drive. For a heartbeat, the beams trapped her face in harsh white light, eyes sealed shut, mouth slack, fresh snowflakes gathering like fragile lace along her lashes. Then he cranked the wheel hard, and the glow swung away. She melted into the black void of the rearview mirror. He stomped the gas pedal. The taillights flared crimson for a second before the storm's churning white curtain erased them completely. The highway bent sharply into dense pine woods. In moments, the entire nightmare scene might as well have never existed. Gone. Finished. Buried. Caleb released a long, trembling breath, pulse finally dropping from its frantic gallop. His phone rattled insistently in the cup holder, most likely his brother, texting to ask why he'd vanished from the family chat. He let it vibrate unanswered. He'd cobble together a believable story later, wrong turn, bad cell service, something mundane. Right now, every mile he put between himself and that stretch of road felt like safety stacking higher. The asphalt stretched ahead, desolate and ink-black, flanked by walls of snow-bent evergreens. No headlights in the distance, no porch lights flickering through the trees, no sign of civilization, just endless wilderness and the smug, ironclad conviction that he'd slipped the noose. A faint, crooked smile tugged at Caleb's mouth. No one knew Lila was lying out there. No one was coming to look for her. He'd been meticulous about that part. Far behind him, Lila Harper remained motionless on the ice-slick highway. Her shattered phone lay 6 feet away, screen cracked and lifeless. The nearest gas station's outdoor thermometer, visible only to passing headlights, read 28 degrees Fahrenheit and falling steadily. 90 minutes, give or take, before hypothermia locked her organs in irreversible shutdown. 2 hours, and her heart would simply quit. Snow drifted down in patient, unending veils, blanketing her inch by careful inch. The road stayed utterly still, the silence so thick it felt like the world had forgotten how to make sound. Yet in that heavy quiet, something stirred. Twin beams pierced the darkness at the far end of the highway, not chasing from the direction Caleb had fled, but approaching from the opposite way, the same lonely stretch Lila had driven before he'd forced her vehicle onto the shoulder. A sleek black SUV materialized from the swirling white, rolling forward with measured calm, neither hurried nor uncertain. Its powerful headlights swept the deserted pavement, glinting off reflective mile markers, illuminating drifts of fresh powder and, finally, the small, dark heap lying motionless in the center of the lane. The vehicle eased to a stop 30 feet away. Engine purring low, headlights bathing Lila's body in cold, clinical light. For what felt like an eternity, nothing moved. Only the soft thrum of the idling motor, the faint hiss of snowflakes meeting warm metal, and the heartbreaking stillness of a woman slipping away alone. Then the driver's door opened with a quiet click. A tall figure stepped out into the storm, broad-shouldered, unruffled, clad in a long charcoal overcoat left unbuttoned against the sub-zero bite. Dark hair dusted with snow, angular features carved from shadow and control, expression unreadable as stone. He paused beside the open door, eyes methodically scanning the scene with the calm certainty of a man who had known, down to the exact mile marker, he would find exactly this. Damian Reyes had been shadowing Caleb Voss's every misstep for months, quietly collecting receipts, watching the cracks widen, waiting for the inevitable collapse. Tonight, those cracks had finally split wide open, leading straight to this frozen stretch of nowhere. He stepped forward without haste, boots sinking into the fresh powder with measured crunches. No sprint, no frantic scramble, just the slow, unhurried stride of someone who knew the outcome had been written long before he arrived. The headlights threw his shadow ahead of him, a long dark ribbon stretching across the snow-dusted asphalt until it brushed the edge of Lila's motionless form. His breath plumed in steady white clouds, flakes gathered on the shoulders of his open coat like silent witnesses. He halted beside her, gaze dropping to the broken woman at his feet. His face remained a mask, cool calculation, perhaps, or something deeper and more unreadable flickering behind the stillness. Then, very deliberately, he turned his head and stared back down the empty highway in the direction Caleb's taillights had vanished. In that single, suspended moment, alone on a deserted winter road with death breathing shallowly beside him, Damien made the choice that would tear apart every lie Caleb thought he'd buried forever. The night wasn't ending. It was only just waking up. Lila's first awareness wasn't agony. It was the cold, deep, suffocating, like sinking beneath black water where every sound grew muffled and distant, where limbs turned to lead. She willed her eyes open, but the command dissolved somewhere between thought and action. She tried to shift, to push herself up, but her body felt like a stranger's, disconnected, unresponsive, already drifting away. Somewhere, faintly, she registered breathing. Was it hers? Or someone else's, close by? The distinction blurred. Snowflakes brushed her cheek, soft, insistent, melting into skin that had almost stopped feeling anything. Each delicate touch seemed to murmur the same invitation: give in, sink deeper, let the numbness swallow what little fight remained. Her mind clawed for an anchor, anything solid to hold onto. A flash, Caleb's face contorted in fury, fist arcing down, the world spinning sideways, pavement rising to meet her skull. The memory came in jagged pieces, edges softened by shock. She had been escaping, truly escaping at last. 3 years spent tiptoeing around landmines, 3 years of saying sorry for breathing too loud, 3 years of watching her own reflection grow smaller and paler until she no longer recognized the woman staring back. Tonight she had finally chosen herself. I'm through shielding your lies, Caleb. The words had come out steady in her apartment doorway, keys biting into her palm, duffel bag already slung over her shoulder. She'd believed, foolishly, that the restraining order she'd filed that very afternoon would hold weight, that he wouldn't dare follow, that freedom might actually stick this time. She had been catastrophically wrong. Each shallow inhale scorched her lungs. Something deep in her chest felt shattered, grinding bone against bone with every breath. Ribs, most likely, maybe worse. Years ago she'd taken a weekend first aid class, back when she still thought information could act as armor. The terms drifted up now like wreckage: flail chest, collapsed lung, slow internal bleed. They floated through the fog of her mind, useless and detached. She commanded her left arm to move. Nothing answered. The neural pathways had gone dark, signals dying before they reached muscle. Panic flickered in her ribcage like a wounded bird beating useless wings. Move. Rise. Crawl. Fight. But her body refused the order. She was locked inside her own skin, a helpless passenger watching the wreckage barrel toward the end with no brakes, no steering wheel, no way out. The cold pressed harder, relentless. She knew the stages from Minnesota winters spent bundled against blizzards. Numbness claims the edges first, fingers, toes, already vanished. Then the body retreats, sacrificing limbs to protect the vital core. Shivering comes next, violent, full-body convulsions. Then disorientation. And finally, the cruelest trick, a deceptive flush of warmth that convinces victims they're overheating, so they strip off layers and curl up to die. Which phase was she in? Would she even recognize the moment she crossed into the last one? Her thoughts wandered, unmoored, back to the tiny apartment she'd left behind, cluttered canvases leaning against walls, the sharp bite of turpentine mingling with cooling coffee. She'd been deep into a new series, butterflies clawing free of cocoons, wings still wet and fragile. The symbolism hit her now like a dull blade. All those months rendering transformation on canvas while her own life had been quietly suffocating, piece by piece. Who had she been before Caleb? The question echoed hollowly. She couldn't summon the answer anymore. He'd stripped away so much, her laugh, her circle of friends, the simple certainty that the world was safe enough to walk through alone. He'd done it gradually, patiently, the way a river wears down rock, small criticisms, quiet isolations, apologies that always came wrapped in flowers. By the time the damage registered, she was already hollowed out, missing parts of herself she no longer had names for. And tonight he'd taken what little remained. A distant sound reached her, maybe an engine, maybe wind rattling branches. Her fading awareness couldn't sort truth from hallucination. Past and present bled together, terror and surrender blurred into one gray tide. She thought of her mother, gone 15 years now. Cancer had stolen her slowly, breath by stolen breath, until silence claimed the room. Was this what the end felt like? That eerie calm settling over the fear like fresh snow? "I'm sorry, Mom," the thought whispered. "I should have fought harder." But what did fighting look like against men like Caleb? Men who wore charm like a mask in daylight and unleashed hell behind closed doors. Men who said "I'm sorry" with roses one day and bruises the next. Men who convinced you, slowly, insidiously, that every mark was your fault, every scream justified, every fear earned. She had fought. 6 times before tonight she'd packed bags, changed locks, whispered plans to friends who'd stopped answering calls. Each time he'd reeled her back, tears one round, threats the next, vows of change that expired the moment she unpacked. This time she'd kept it secret. Filed the order quietly. Loaded the car at dawn. Driven into the night without a backward glance. He tracked her anyway. Because men like Caleb always do. Her breaths grew shallower, more labored. The fire in her side dulled, not from healing, but from her body running out of ways to scream. Systems were powering down, one by one, lights winking out in an empty house. This, she realized dimly, was how it ended, alone on a winter highway because she'd finally dared to save herself. Her breaths grew thinner, more ragged, each one a labored sip that barely moved her chest. The sharp fire in her ribs had dulled to a distant throb, not because the damage was healing, but because her body was quietly surrendering, running out of strength to scream. Organs began to dim, one after another, like candles snuffed out in an abandoned room. This is how it ends, Lila thought through the thickening fog. Alone on a frozen highway because I finally dared to choose myself. The sheer unfairness of it should have set her blood boiling, should have summoned one last defiant surge. Instead, exhaustion pressed down heavier than the snow. She was weary of the endless vigilance, of flinching at raised voices, of hauling around the shame Caleb had convinced her she deserved. Perhaps surrender was kinder. Perhaps the cold was offering release. Snowflakes settled on her closed eyelids, tangled in her lashes, dusted the corners of her mouth. Her exhales came in faint, ghostly wisps that dissolved instantly. The road stretched on forever in both directions, empty and indifferent, and Lila felt herself drifting farther from it, from pain, from everything, sliding toward a darkness that whispered promises of peace. Then, footsteps. Real ones. Close. Heavy boots breaking through the crust of snow with slow, purposeful weight. No frantic rush, no stumble. Lila's fading mind registered the sound but couldn't make sense of it. Was it memory playing tricks? A final hallucination her brain conjured to soften the end? The steps halted right beside her. A presence knelt, close enough that she felt the faint shift in the air, the subtle warmth of another body cutting through the freeze. In that razor-thin margin between life and oblivion, Lila sensed the impossible. She was no longer alone. Damian Reyes did not put faith in luck or chance. He trusted patterns, the long arithmetic of cause and effect, the certainty that every action eventually collides with its price. Men like Caleb Voss always left breadcrumbs, careless, arrogant ones, because they never truly believed anyone was paying attention. Caleb had miscalculated. Damian dropped to one knee beside Lila's still form, the hem of his charcoal coat sweeping across the snow-dusted pavement. Up close the brutality was even more stark than he'd anticipated. The left side of her face had swollen grotesquely. Deep violet bruising was already spreading like spilled ink beneath her cheekbone. Dried blood crusted in her dark hair, gluing strands to the gash on her scalp. Her breathing was erratic, short, stuttering gasps that sounded one shallow inhale away from stopping altogether. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her throat. A pulse answered, faint, thready, clinging stubbornly. Core temperature plunging. 30 minutes, perhaps less, before permanent damage locked in. Damien's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. For 3 months he trailed Caleb, logging every skimmed dollar, every whispered lie to men who did not forgive humiliation. Small thefts that had quietly compounded into a debt large enough to demand collection. But this broken woman lying in the snow, was not part of the ledger. This was not business. This was fury unleashed without restraint, a man too weak to own his violence who'd chosen to let nature finish the job rather than face what he'd done. Damien rose slowly, eyes sweeping the scene with the detached precision of someone who read violence the way others read maps. The shattered phone several feet away. One lone boot discarded like forgotten evidence. Fresh tire tracks curving sharply where Caleb's truck had whipped around and fled. The narrative was clear to anyone who knew how to look, impulsive, sloppy, driven by rage instead of planning. Which meant Caleb was unraveling. Which meant more errors were coming. That was useful. He returned to the idling black SUV, boots carving deep prints in the untouched powder. Headlights still pinned Lila's body in their beam, turning the snow around her into a pale stage. Damien opened the rear door, retrieved his phone, and placed the first call. It connected instantly. "Medical team," he said, voice low and clipped. "Discreet extraction. Blunt trauma, probable internal injuries, advanced hypothermia. 20 minutes or she won't survive the trip." No questions came from the other end. Coordinates were exchanged. Estimated arrival confirmed. Damien ended the call and dialed again. "Locate Caleb Voss," he instructed. "Shadow only. No contact. I want real-time movement, contacts, every decision he makes until dawn." He disconnected without waiting for confirmation. Then he walked back to Lila. In one fluid motion he shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it over her, tucking the edges carefully around her shoulders and chest. The act was tactical, trapping what little body heat remained, slowing the hypothermia's advance, but the way he smoothed the fabric over her face, shielding it from the relentless snowfall, carried a gentleness that went beyond utility. For long seconds he simply stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the faint rise and fall of her chest. Snow gathered on his shoulders, flecked his dark hair, outlined the hard lines of his face. The cold seemed to slide off him like water off stone. He waited the way men wait when they are used to being the last thing standing in places where others run. Lila shifted, barely. Not conscious, but some primal instinct deep in her cells caused her body to twitch toward warmth. A small, broken sound slipped from her throat, half whimper, half sigh. Her fingers curled weakly beneath the coat. "Stay with me," Damien murmured, too low for her to hear, more to the night than to her. "They're coming." He glanced at his watch, 17 minutes until the team arrived. 17 minutes to hold the line between her and the dark. He knelt once more, carefully tilting her head to open the airway wider. His movements were calm, practiced, the hands of someone who had stabilized more than one body in worse places than this. From an inner pocket he produced a small penlight, checked her pupils, sluggish but reactive. Listened to her breathing, too shallow, too uneven. Probed the head wound gently, clotting on the surface, but the damage beneath was serious. She needed surgery, fluids, rewarming, time, things he couldn't give her here on this godforsaken road. But he could give her these next 17 minutes. And he would. She needed real medical intervention, a sterile operating room, for fluids, controlled rewarming, time to let her body fight back. None of that could happen here, exposed on this godforsaken stretch of black ice. But any hospital meant paperwork, mandatory reporting, police showing up with questions about the bruises, the head trauma, the tire marks that didn't match a simple car breakdown. Questions would lead to deeper digging, and digging could unearth threads Damien preferred to keep buried deep in shadow. He'd have to route this carefully, off the grid, through channels that didn't leave traces. A flicker of light caught the corner of his eye. Headlights approaching from the south, cutting slow through the whiteout. Damien's hand drifted instinctively toward the concealed holster at his waist, then eased away as the vehicle slowed. An old pickup, panels pitted with rust, eased to a cautious stop about 30 feet back. The driver's door creaked open. An older man stepped out, gray hair peeking from under a wool cap, heavy winter coat zipped to the chin, face creased with concern and confusion. "Everything all right over there?" the man called, voice carrying over the wind. Damien rose smoothly, stepping forward just enough to place himself squarely between the stranger and Lila's covered form. "Car accident," he answered evenly. "Help's already en route." The man narrowed his eyes, trying to peer past Damien's broad silhouette. "That lady looks pretty bad. I've got a blanket in the cab, maybe some water, no need." Damien's tone stayed calm, almost polite, but there was steel beneath it, an unspoken boundary that made the air feel heavier. The stranger instinctively took half a step back. "Right, okay." The man rubbed the back of his neck. "Just wanted to make sure." I'll get going then. Safe drive." The older man lingered another second, gaze flicking once more toward the dark shape beneath the coats, then climbed back into his truck. The engine coughed to life, taillights glowed dull red as he pulled away slowly, checking his mirror repeatedly until the storm swallowed him whole. Damien waited until the lights vanished completely before turning back to Lila. 14 minutes left on the clock. He knelt again, fingers finding her carotid. The pulse had weakened further, erratic, thready. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint despite the layers he'd piled on. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over the coat, tucking it tight around her shoulders and torso. The thin dress shirt beneath did almost nothing against the wind, but Damien didn't flinch. Caleb's stomach lurched like he'd missed a step on dark stairs. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't return the question with a smile. His expression stayed cool, carved from the same unyielding calm as the night around them. "We've never met. But I know your name. I know the cash you've been quietly siphoning from Mr. Bellamy's accounts. I know the stories you've spun to cover your tracks. And now, I know what you did to Lila Harper tonight." Caleb's blood turned to ice. He looked down at his own hands, the swollen knuckles, the faint smear of red on his cuff he hadn't even noticed until this second. "You've got the wrong guy," he stammered. "I don't know what you're—" Damien took one measured step forward. The space between them shrank, the air grew thicker. "You beat her unconscious and left her on the side of the road to freeze. She's still breathing, for now. If she makes it through the night, you might keep breathing too. If she doesn't," he let the sentence hang, unfinished. "Debts like yours tend to grow interest fast." Caleb's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Denial poured out in a frantic rush. "I didn't touch her. I wasn't even there. You've got no proof." But Damien didn't interrupt. He simply reached into his pocket and produced his phone. A few taps later, the screen lit his face from below, time-stamped photos of Caleb's truck on the highway shoulder, security stills from a gas station showing him buying gas earlier that evening, audio snippets of him arguing with Lila weeks before. Evidence laid out like cards on a table. No bluff. No room to squirm. Before Caleb could bolt, two more figures stepped from the shadows near the sedan, silent, professional, faces hidden under hoods. They moved with practiced efficiency. One took Caleb's arm in an iron grip, the other patted him down and relieved him of his keys and phone. No words. No struggle. Just quiet inevitability. "You'll be confessing everything," Damien said flatly. "The embezzlement. The assault. You'll repay what you stole, every cent, before the rest of your consequences arrive. And they will arrive." Caleb was already being guided toward the waiting vehicle. He didn't fight. The fight had drained out of him the moment those headlights pinned him in the parking lot. At the same moment, 37 miles back, the medical team's blacked-out van rolled to a stop beside Lila's body. No flashing lights, no sirens, just efficient motion. 2 paramedics in unmarked gear dropped to their knees beside her while a third prepped the stretcher. Damien stepped back to give them room, watching every move with hawk-like focus. They worked fast, oxygen mask, thermal blankets, for line started in the crook of her elbow, careful spinal precautions as they transferred her to the stretcher and loaded her into the van. Damien climbed in behind them. The doors shut. The van accelerated smoothly into the night, heading not toward any public ER, but to a private surgical clinic 30 minutes away, Dr. Elena Voss's facility, off books, trusted, discreet. Inside the clinic, under bright surgical lights, the team moved with precision. Skull fracture stabilized, ribs plated, punctured lung repaired, aggressive rewarming protocols initiated. Hours later, Lila surfaced slowly from anesthesia in a private room, monitors beeping softly, warm blankets cocooning her, the sharp antiseptic smell of safety replacing the bite of winter air. Damien was there when her good eye fluttered open. He sat in the chair beside the bed, elbows on knees, hands clasped, still in the same dress shirt, sleeves rolled, no sign of fatigue. "You're safe," he said quietly before she could speak. "You're in a private clinic. No police. No questions. The man who did this to you is being handled." Lila's voice cracked on the first try. "Caleb won't come near you again. Ever." She searched his face, fear and confusion warring with exhaustion. "Why were you there? On that road?" A long pause. Damien looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I'd been watching him for months. He was stealing from people I protect. I used the pressure I put on him to force mistakes, and you got caught in the crossfire. You were never supposed to be part of it. For that, I'm sorry. Truly." Tears slipped down her bruised cheek. She didn't speak for a long time. Damien stayed. Through the night he sat vigil, quiet when she slept, murmuring reassurance when nightmares made her flinch. Over the following days he arranged everything: physical therapy, pain management, a new apartment on the north side, secure building, rent paid 2 years in advance, a funded account for living expenses. Her paintings, her supplies, every belonging she'd left behind, delivered and carefully placed. The studio room even had perfect north light. When she was strong enough to sit up without help, she looked at him across the hospital bed. "Why go this far? You don't owe me anything." "You were collateral in my war," he answered. "I don't leave collateral behind. And you remind me that some people are still worth saving, still capable of rebuilding after everything's been broken." She swallowed. "Will I see you again?" His gaze softened, just for a second. "No. My world is dangerous. Anyone close to me becomes a target. You've earned safety more than you've earned my company." 11 days later she was discharged. One of Damien's drivers, Marcus, drove her to the new place in silence. The apartment was clean, bright, untouched by violence. Her canvases hung framed on the walls. She found the phone on the counter with one number programmed. She dialed it that night. Damien answered on the first ring. "Lila. You moved my paintings. You're an artist. Your work belongs where you can see it. The frames cost more than I've ever made in a year. Art deserves to be seen properly." A pause. "Are you settling in?" She looked around the quiet space, throat tight. "Why do all this? You could have just walked away." "Because I failed to protect you once," he said simply. "I won't fail twice. Heal. Create. Live without fear. That's all I ask. Will you ever check on me?" "No. But you'll be watched over. If trouble comes, it'll be handled before it reaches your door." She closed her eyes. "That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted quietly. "Be safe, Lila Harper. Make beautiful things." The line went dead. She rebuilt. Slowly. painfully. Her Metamorphosis series, Wings Born from Wounds, earned a major gallery commission. The work poured out of her bold, raw, unflinching portraits of survival. Panic attacks still came, sudden, vicious, but she learned breathing techniques, grounding rituals, how to ride the wave without drowning. She never called Damien's number again. She saved herself instead. 4 months later, a news alert pinged her phone. Local man found dead in custody after confessing to fraud and assault. No mention of her name. No photos. Just the quiet closing of a chapter. At her first solo gallery opening that spring, a courier slipped through the crowd with a small package. Inside, a single photograph, the frozen road at night, her unconscious body half covered in snow, and in the corner, a tall figure striding toward her through the storm. Damien, captured mid-step. Tucked beside it, a note on heavy cardstock. You survived because you were stronger than the cold, stronger than the violence, stronger than the man who believed he could break you. I was only there to witness it. I'm proud of the life you've built. Dr. She hung the photo above her easel, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof someone had come. She had not been left to die alone. Lila kept painting. A woman walking through snow toward unseen light. Trusting it was there. Claiming her own rescue, stroke by stroke. Outside her windows the city hummed on, indifferent, relentless, alive. But inside her new home, shielded by invisible safeguards she would never fully understand, Lila Harper created art that refused to stay silent. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. Your attention is what makes these journeys feel real. If you're hungry for another powerful ride, just swipe to the next video. Before you go, drop a comment. Where are you watching from tonight? And give this tale a quick rating, 1 to 10. I read every one and love connecting with you all in the comments. See you in the next one. Stay safe out there.